You're listening to the Captain's Coach Podcast, where we provide top insights into sports leadership and peak performance through interviews with some of the greatest team captains and thought leaders in the sports world. Now, here is your host, performance coach, speaker, and author, Ben Smith.
Welcome to the Captain's Coach Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Smith, and I'm excited to talk to you all again today as we continue into our series on the 6 tenets of leadership. And today is going to be the first day that we go in depth on the very first tenet, which is that everything rises and falls on leadership. So again, this is the importance of this is that it's instilling this sense of ownership. And I personally believe that the more ownership that we have, Jocko Willink talks about this extreme ownership of taking ownership of all results, any results that you get. It's an important place to begin with these team captains. And I mentioned before in the past podcast about this book called The Captain's Class, and how research is pointing to the importance of this role. When we look at society in general, we look at businesses and high-performing organizations, and we see these stories of these great leaders coming into organizations or coming into teams and completely turning it around for the better and allowing, for years and years of excellent results and of great value added. And then we also see on the flip side of that, leaders who are not as great, who really are to the detriment of a program or organization, who really drive these poor results. And so we see it on a day-to-day basis and year to year and over decades of how important leadership is. And I do love this quote. This is from John Maxwell. And again, I think it's an important place to start with. If you can instill this sense of ownership into your team captains, it's going to be a real driving force for the rest of the actions that they take and the results that you all get as a team. So the first place to start again is the fact that it is on you. You have to realize as a team captain that it falls on you. Again, the research is pointing to the fact that it's not the coach necessarily, although the coach is incredibly important. This book was pointing to the fact that it's not the coach, it's not the tactics, it's not the strategy, it's not the amount of resources that you even have. It is you. So realize that that's the case. I've so many stories of captains not fully understanding, number one, the importance of their role, and then not taking ownership of their inability to influence members of their team or even their coaches at some point. I think, a couple of the really great captains that I've seen, I've witnessed, I've had the opportunity to coach or even to just watch is their ability to, and first off, their desire to win, and their realization of this concept of ownership. And not only that, but their ability to influence, even at such a younger age, to influence their coaches and their players. A quick story that I always love telling is that, there was once this coach who was a linebackers coach, and he was really trying to hammer home this one, I think it might have been a play or some sort of a technique, and this kid just wasn't getting it. And the head coach finally came over and said, "Hey, what's going on with Joe at linebacker?" And the assistant coach says to the head coach, "I've told him 100 times, and he's just not getting it. He must be stupid." And the head coach turns around and says, "Well, you must be stupid for telling him the same thing 100 times and expecting a different result." And we see a lot of times we see coaches say, this generation is not like it used to be. But they're different, just like every other generation has been different. And it's important to note that you, as the coach, especially, even as the team captain, you both have to take ownership. If they're not listening to you, it's not their fault; it's your fault. If your teammates aren't listening to you, if you're not able to influence them, it's not their fault; it's your fault. So that can be a heavy role to take. When you have that kind of mindset and outlook, it can be tough, and only the greatest of leaders can really take this approach. But if you can take this approach, you will stray away from passivity. And that's kind of the second point here, is that an opposite view of ownership instills this passivity and it gives you excuses to use. And the more excuses that you can use, that you can think of, and that you actually believe, when you believe this narrative that you can't directly control other people, which you can't, but you can influence them. And the more ownership you take on your responsibility to influence other people, the more results that you're going to get. And again, I think you have two ways to look at this. You have this view of taking ownership with everything, taking this extreme ownership, or this view where that says, well, I can't directly control them, so I'm not even going to try. And so it gives you this way out, and you don't want any kind of way out. One of the HP6 from Brendon Burchard is that you have to raise necessity. And so this is kind of a way to do that. You have to raise the necessity and raise the importance of what you're doing and the ownership that you take within your team. Now, another point, again, I was mentioned in the last podcast, was this law of the lid, which I believe was one of John Maxwell's 21 laws of leadership. And within it, he just essentially says that we all have this leadership capability, this current skill set. And from a number of 1 to 10, you fall somewhere there in that spectrum, in that continuum. And let's say if you're a 6, your team will never be more than a 6. I had a really funny semester with a team where I was kind of acting as a part-time assistant coach, but really focused more so on leadership development for the coach and the captains. And the coach started continuously, they weren't doing too well, and he started continuously making these comments. He was getting frustrated with the fact that his team didn't feel like they were buying in. He felt like they didn't care. He used the whole, this generation isn't what the generation that I had. I would have never done X, Y, and Z. I would have never not shown up for practice. And so I kind of let it go. And then finally, after a couple days of this, I stopped him and I said, now we'll call him Joe. I said, Joe, what does it matter to you that this team is actually successful? From 1 to 10, how much does it matter that this team meets the goals that you've set forth for it? And without me even giving him any kind of metric or measurement or standard to be able to give him, he essentially said, well, probably about a 4. And I literally laughed out loud. I thought to myself, and I told him, I said, so how can you be upset at them if your will to win, basically your will to win is only a 4, because your team is never going to care more than you care. And that's a little bit different than what we're talking about with the law of the lid, but I think it's still important to realize that your team is a reflection of you, especially as the team captain. I have so many stories where I've worked with teams and been on part of teams, or even times when I've been a team captain and the team reflected my own strengths and weaknesses. And it's just a crazy, it's just a crazy thing to witness, to realize that how teams reflect their leadership. I was reading an article yesterday about culture and how we can change it, but one of the comments that this article had in it was that culture was 80%, of the leader. And I thought that was a good point to make that I agreed with. And that's the same kind of deal here, is that you are your team. Your team is you, and your team is a reflection of your strengths and weaknesses, your will to win, your decision-making abilities, your character. So again, this law of the lid is important to realize when we talk about everything rises and falls on leadership, because you have the responsibility to your team as the leader to grow. Because if you don't grow, your team will never grow, because you are the lid, and your team will never be more effective, will never be more influential than where you're at. And then to finalize this tenet here, again, because this is heavy. This can be very heavy for individuals who really take on this extreme ownership and bring it to the next level here. It can be difficult to deal with failure. So we have to really understand the difference between fixed and growth mentality. And because a lot of people, again, if you have a fixed mentality and you take this extreme ownership route, it can be really detrimental to your leadership and to your self-confidence, because you're not going to be able to do it all correctly, especially as a 17, 16-year-old kid who is trying to lead their team, or even a coach. We have to realize that we go through experiences and we learn through these experiences, and that's how we grow. It's just part of the process of failure comes and we learn from it, and nobody's perfect. And but it's important to realize that your traits, your skill sets, even who you are, your very character, is constantly being formed. It's constantly changing and molding and improving or getting worse. And so it's important to realize that this is, if you fail, you're not a failure. Do not attach your identity and your significance to the results that you're getting. And with that, if you can do that, you're going to be extremely successful. Again, so just to wrap this up here, take ownership. Realize that you have two options to take. Realize that it is all on you, or you can be passive and allow for these small little narratives just to slip by you and to give you a way out. And you don't want that. You want to take extreme ownership. Realize that it's all on you. We see it all the time in life, in the corporate world, in the business world, and in any teams. We see these great leaders and these poor leaders, and how the programs wax and wane and improve or get worse because of the leadership that's within the organizations. And so the law of the lid, we talked about your team as a reflection of you. Your team will never care more than you, and they will never be more than you. So you have this responsibility to grow. And then when you do fail, when you come through and across failure, which will happen, realize that you are not the result that you get. Your identity and significance is is weighed far more than just wins and losses. So best of luck. Take this first tenet, teach it to your team captains, and for you coaches, you can take these same concepts as well and utilize them as you lead your teams as well. So best of luck.
Thanks for listening to the Captain's Coach Podcast with Ben Smith. If you liked what you just heard, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes and check out our website at captainscoach.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Captain's Coach Podcast.